Welcome to the Rare Wellness Podcast. The pressures of this modern world, life, and society often steer us towards unhealthy lifestyles. Wellness is a rare treasure hidden in a maze of daily challenges. In this podcast, we will illuminate uncommon pathways to health and vitality, exploring cutting-edge ideas in regenerative, longevity, and performance medicine, all delivered in bite-sized segments of 5 minutes or less. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Lewis, and today we'll be diving into measuring metabolic health. This podcast is brought to you by Northwest Center for Regenerative and Performance Medicine, located in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. Visit us online at www.nwc4rm.com. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended for medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns or treatment. In our last episode, we discussed metabolic syndrome. Now, metabolic syndrome is a combination of high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excessive visceral fat, and abnormal cholesterol. Now, although there are specific values that define metabolic syndrome, this is really the end of a spectrum of metabolic dysfunction. And when we talk about longevity and performance medicine, we want to keep our bodies on the other side of this spectrum at optimum metabolic function. To identify how our bodies are doing, there's some simple measurements that we can do to assess our metabolic wellness. When we talk about measuring our metabolic health and metabolic wellness, there are 4 main measurements that we want to look at. First measurement is body composition or distribution of muscle and fat in our bodies. Second is our vital signs, our resting heart rate and blood pressure. Third, and often neglected, is how much sleep we're getting. It is impossible to be at optimal metabolic health if your body is simply not getting enough sleep. And the fourth is laboratory measures of your metabolic health and processes. We're going to briefly go through how to take measurements in all these domains, and in the members only section, we'll have a list of resources of some devices that we think offer superior performance at the best value. The first thing we're going to talk about is measuring our body composition. Now, the easiest way to measure a body composition is getting an electrical impedance body composition scale. And these are relatively of good quality and technology nowadays. And you can get a very decent quality one for around $100, but spend up to $400. The measurements you want to look at first is a body mass index. And a body mass index is simply a measurement of height to weight. And you generally are looking for a body mass index of somewhere between 18.5 to 25. Crossing between 25 and 30 is considered overweight, and obese is considered above 30. Now, the limitation to the body mass index is it's simply a ratio of your height to weight. It doesn't take into account muscle mass. And so a body composition scale will further break down fat and muscle mass. Now, with respect to fat mass in men, we're looking for a range of around 14 to 17%, and in women, we're looking for a range of 21 to 24%. Now, the problem with excess fat is it's going to suggest excess visceral fat, which remember is the bad type of fat that promotes a pro-inflammatory state. It also promotes a pro-estrogen environment. It makes it more difficult for us to create muscle, and also makes it more difficult for us to adequately process our nutrients and have good metabolic health. Muscle mass is also important, particularly in longevity literature. Shows that it's very difficult to build muscle the older we are, so we definitely want to build muscle when we're young and retain it as we age. Muscle mass has to do with how well we're able to function as we get older. And in general, in men, we're looking for muscle mass percentage rate of somewhere between 33 to 40%, and in women, somewhere between 23 and 30%. Next thing we're going to talk about is our resting heart rate and blood pressure. This is a measurement of how hard our heart has to work at rest to deliver oxygen to our tissues. Now, our heart rate and blood pressure are fairly easy to measure. You want to just be in a somewhat restful state, be sitting, have your arm extended on your lap, and take your measurement. Usually with a wrist cuff is easy to get at home. And we're looking for a heart rate of generally around 80 or less at rest, and a blood pressure typically of 120 over 80, kind of being the top numbers at rest. Next, sleep. Sleep is also very important at maintaining metabolic health. If you're not getting enough sleep, it's very hard for your body to have optimum metabolic performance. And people should be getting between 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Sleep is generally pretty easy to measure with a sleep tracker. Again, we'll recommend some devices for tracking sleep, heart rate, and blood pressure in a members only section. Last, I'm going to talk about metabolic lab values that give us some insight on our metabolic health. And to get these done, you need to have a healthcare provider order these values for us, but they really give us really good detailed insight on how your body's doing metabolically. The mainstay is your fasting glucose, and glucose is your main source of energy that your body uses to transport energy to the cells, and generally you want a fasting glucose level of under 100. And then we'll also measure with that the insulin level, which is the peptide that your body uses to drive that glucose into the cell. And that's a marker of how hard your body needs to work to push that glucose into the cell. If that level's high, it suggests you're developing some insulin resistance, which again is an early sign of metabolic syndrome. Then we get a marker called the hemoglobin A1C, which looks back over the last 3 months and sees where your glucose has been. And that also gives us a nice, instead of just that one-time fasting snapshot, it gives us more of a global snapshot to how your body's been doing over the last 3 months. And we generally want that less than 5.5. Recently, we have the advent of these things called CGMs, or continuous glucose monitors. And these are very nice because they give us some real-time insight that we can get at home. Basically, it's a little monitor that has a teeny little catheter that just goes right through the skin. You can barely feel it. It gets stuck on your arm or upper back area, and it gives you a continuous feedback on what your glucose is, and you can watch how your body responds to the food you eat. And it gives you very good information. I highly recommend at least trying one for 10 days and then looking over that data. And it's pretty likely you might want to make some lifestyle changes after seeing that. The next thing we're going to want to look at as far as our metabolic panel is going to be our lipid panel, which is looking at how we're processing cholesterol and fat. And now that's going to look at cholesterol, triglycerides, HDL, which is classically thought of as the good cholesterol because it's large and not likely to get stuck in the arteries. LDL, classically thought of as the bad cholesterol, smaller. This is the one that's going to be more likely to get stuck in the arteries and form plaques and cause coronary vascular, cerebral vascular disease. More importantly now, we look at some of the proteins that are on the LDL, that's ApoE and lipoprotein A1, that tend to predict how likely those LDL particles are going to get stuck and form plaques. We're also going to want to check cortisol levels, which is a sign of stress and metabolic dysfunction, and our hormone levels, which contribute to our overall metabolic wellness. That's it for today's episode. If you need any assistance assessing your metabolic health and live in the Pacific Northwest, schedule an evaluation via the link in the show notes page. Thank you for joining me today in the Rare Wellness Podcast. Again, if you found today's episode useful or learned something new, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with a friend or someone who might find it useful. Your support helps us to continue to provide free content to empower your journey to better health. This is Dr. Jamie Lewis reminding you that your body holds incredible potential to heal, thrive, and perform. Sometimes it just needs the right tools to unlock its full potential and live your best life now. See you next time.